Hey, it's Chris, and in this episode, we're going to talk about slicers. So you got your printer all set up and leveled, and now you're ready to start printing. Well, to start printing, you're going to need a slicer program, and I'm going to cover the two main ones, Ultimaker Cura and Joseph Prusa's Prusa slicer. This episode will be about the Cura, and then the next episode will be about Prusa Slicer. I'm going to show you all the basics and functions to each one so that you can get a general understanding of how the slicers work and what things you change normally on for your general printing needs. And then later on, I'll get into more deeper stuff about how to tweak your prints and stuff to make them look the best. Okay, so first thing we're going to do is download Ultimaker Cura. You should be able to just type in Cura and it should basically be one of the first things that you choose. And then download for free. And then Windows 64 EXE. And then once that's downloaded, you'll run the install. Just choose the default location for everything. And when it gets done, it'll say to finish. Okay, finish and run. Okay, now what the first thing you're going to do is go to the dots here and you're going to make sure everything is set to all, so that way you'll have all the settings show up. If it starts on basic, then you won't get nearly all the settings that you might see, and if somebody suggests something to you and you can't find it, that's going to be the reason why, is because you don't have it set to all. So be sure and set that to all when you first get there. And then, so the standard quality is going to be 0.2 millimeters. Then yours, based on what your system does, is capable of, you can go down to smaller layer levels for higher quality, and so your stuff will, the walls and stuff will look even better with less layer lines and stuff. But it does take longer to print the smaller layers, so I usually just put everything on standard 2. And then first thing you're going to look at is walls. Line count's normally 3, and that's for the walls around all the outside of your print. That's going to be the stronger part of it, of your print. So if you need something that needs more strength, you're going to want to add more walls to it. And then, but the standard is 3, so you always want to put that back if you're going back to doing normal prints and not something that needs a lot of weight support or anything. And then if you do like hooks and stuff that are thin and they're like hanging off a table, then you can do like 99 walls, and that'll just print all walls for the hook, and then it'll be at the strongest. You want to do that over infill, but you can make infill strong too, and I'll show you that in just a bit here. Top and bottom layers, usually going to do 4 as the standard. If you have any problems with pillowing or anything, you might want to increase that number, or if something looks crappy on the top or bottom. But standard is usually 4, and that should be good for most of the stuff you do. And then infill, it's going to depend on what kind of print you're doing. So I normally print just cubic, and I'll do anywhere between 5% and 20% depending on how strong I want it to be. I do a lot of the functional prints, so I do stuff to fix things around the house and stuff, and there's sometimes where I need it to be stronger because it's holding some weight of something, or it's put on a tool that I'm going to be using. So you can vary that between 5 and 20%. Usually is about the most you'll really need. You can go up to 50. I wouldn't recommend doing 100%, because if you're going to do 100%, you might as well just do all walls instead, because that does give you a stronger lineup than the actual 100% infill. But you can also strengthen the infill by telling it to mine multiplier, so it'll print instead of one line on each part of the infill, it'll draw 2 of them together, and that will make it stronger. But the different types are grid lines, triangles, trihexagon, cubic, octet, quarter octet, concentric, zigzag, cross, cross 3D, gyroid, lightning, grid, and lines are for like statue type stuff where you don't need really any support internally that much. Lightning will be the bare minimum support, so it'll print the internal support lines for stuff that is going to be printed over the top of it. But after that, if it's something like in the statue, once you get up towards from the base up to the middle, it's going to leave it wide open because it doesn't really need that. Your walls can be all the support it needs. And then gyroid, that's the one you're going to use for making aquarium stuff. So you can you can use the gyroid infill and then drill a hole in the bottom, pour sand in, and shake it all over, and it'll get all through the whole thing. You can fill it all the way up with it because the gyroid openings are all over the place, so it's interconnected, but there's open spaces all through the whole thing, so you can get from one corner to the other. Whereas like the cubic, it does sectioned off cubes and kind of like resting on the corner of the cube, and it'll put sectioned off, so all the infill will be in its own little sections. But the gyroid allows you to have an open space all the way through from top to bottom. So if you need to fill it with like water or sand or something, you need to make it a paperweight, then you can do that stuff with it. You can test out some of these other ones. Some of them are for heavier stuff for strength, and then some of them are just to give you enough support for display stuff, and then the lightning's like the bare minimum. So that's what's on those, and you can do more research if you want to look into them a little deeper. The material is going to be your temperature that you're going to print at, and so I always recommend any new filament you get, always make a temp tower. And I'm going to show you at the end of this where to get the temp towers and how to get them so that you can make one on the fly for each one that you get. You'll want to make them for each filament, and even different colors in the same filament brand. You'll want to do that too, because colors are all the different colors that you've got come from different substances. So blue is made from a certain mineral and red's made from a different one. So they're going to have slight differences in how they flow and all that stuff. So you're going to want to make sure, and a lot of times they'll probably be similar on the temperatures that they print at, but you just want to be sure. So because if you make assumptions and then you try to print something and it messes up, well, that's a variable that you didn't look at. So if you do a temp tower for each of your new filaments, then you will have that variable already covered to reduce the troubleshooting. But you can do, so you got your material temperature, and then you also got your build plate temperature. And I usually use 65 with my PLA plus. That's everything that I use is PLA plus, everything I print in. So you're going to want 60 to 65. It just depends, but that's what the temperature, bed temperature I always recommend. And then you can choose your speed, and you can try, eventually down the road, you can try and tweak things to make it print faster. For me personally, I don't really care how long it takes to print, as long as it prints right and I don't have to worry about it, and I don't have to try and spend a bunch of time trying to tweak everything together. If I can just get something, put it in there, print it, and let it go, and it prints successfully every time, I'm happy. I don't care if I just created a garbage can that took 4.5 days to print. I didn't care. I was just letting it print the whole 4.5 days, and it used 3/4 of a spool, and I was fine with that it took 4.5 days. It's like I've got 2 printers, which eventually, once you get used to printing, I recommend getting a second one, just because you can, if you end up making a big project, and you can divide that time out between the two, or if you have one go down, you'll still be able to print, and then you can have time to get the other one back up while you're still continuing a project or something. And especially if you're printing something for somebody, it's always good to have a backup or have the 2 printers, so if one goes down, you can still keep somewhat of a schedule on when you're trying to get stuff done for somebody. And then travel, you want retraction. It should be on by default. It retracts when it's changing layers and going around the print. It'll stop, retract, start a new spot, and go. And you can tell whether to retract a layer change or not. The retraction does affect stringing, and I'll talk about that later on ways to, or what stringing is and the main causes of it and how to fix that and what order to fix it. But also, I always enable Z-hop. That makes the nozzle move up 0.2 millimeters when it's traveling across the print to avoid hitting the print. And you'll find that sometimes if you're slightly over extruding, it helps, because you get some a buildup as you're going up and up and up, and the taller you get, then you'll sometimes end up having it scrape across the infill as you're going. Z-hop is kind of an insurance that to to avoid actually hitting the print or causing any problems with the print while it's doing it. So I always enable Z-Hop by default. And then cooling, I always just leave it at the standard. You can set it as a percentage of speed. When you get into the higher filaments, you're going to want to adjust how quickly it cools, how much it cools, because the higher stuff like PETG and ABS, ABS you pretty much don't use the fan at all because it needs that high temperature to slowly cool down, otherwise it will start pulling up and it starts warping. And so you want to definitely on the higher ones, PLA and PLA plus, I usually just leave it at the defaults, and like it starts at like the 4th layer, it'll start blowing the fan on it, keeping it cool. And supports, you're going to want to, when you're first starting out, just go ahead and enable them every time, and then Cura will decide whether it actually needs it or not. And then later on, once you get comfortable in printing, then you'll kind of understand where and where not that you can do supports, avoid supports. You'll understand the fundamentals of support stuff, and then you'll be able to better choose specifically when you want to generate supports, when you don't, when you want to custom supports, if you want to erase supports on specific things that you know don't need it. That comes with experience. So, but for now, I would just choose to generate support, and then it'll automatically generate support where it needs it, and then you can adjust appropriately if you decide you don't. And a lot of times when I design stuff, I design to minimal supports at all, or no supports. I try to get as minimal supports as possible on the prints that I design, just because it's kind of it's a waste of filament if you don't really need it. Sometimes it's unavoidable, but I try to design everything as much as possible with as minimal support as possible needed. And then build plate adhesion, there are 3 kinds. There's skirt, which is usually chosen by default, and that'll put a 2-line ring around your print, which kind of gives it a little bit of like a heat wall type thing, where it kind of keeps the temperature ambient around the print, just to avoid warping and like cool breezes coming in or any movement of air. Brim is used to hold the print down, so when you get like large flat prints, sometimes you'll have the corners or an edge pull up because they warp from cool air moving by, air movement. And then and I use brim on most of everything I do, just because it's more of a safety, assurance measure that the print will stay flat and won't pull up at all, and then it's just easier just to make sure that it doesn't do anything that you don't want to do. And then there's raft, and raft is a specific for if you have something that's small when it's on the bedside, but it's larger when you're going up, like a sphere. If you're trying to print a sphere, you'd use a raft or an upside down pyramid, something of that kind of nature, where it's going to be a small point on the bottom and a larger point at the top. It just allows you to get a bigger hold on it, because on the bed, it's something like that is gonna wreak havoc. But some people will use it to band-aid bed adhesion, and you need to try to avoid this. And if you're having problems and a raft is the only thing that's letting you print, then you need to stop and figure out what's causing the adhesion problem and fix that before resorting to a brim or resorting to a raft for getting your prints to print. But So I usually mostly use brim on mine. You can try with none. Some things I do none. It just depends on the print, and you'll kind of get a understanding of it, when to use what, and go from there. But that's all the main stuff that you're going to use. Those are all the main settings that you're going to be using when you're beginning the prints. And then later on I'll show you the more in-depth stuff to how to tweak prints to make them look better. And then there's also some stuff that I want to show you in the marketplace that I would definitely recommend to download, install. And there's one of them that's the gets you the temp towers. So auto towers generator is one that I recommend to install, and that'll give you all your towers for different things, like you can do retraction and temp and other stuff, and I'll show you the list once I show you the things. Custom support eraser plus, install that. And then cylinder custom support, I would add that one. And then the calibration shapes, and those will be for troubleshooting if you're having dimensional issues, things like that. And then what you do is, after you install them, you'll restart, close Cura out, and then run it again, and then they'll be installed. And then once you get back into Cura, then they'll be up in the upper left hand under extensions, and then you'll be able to choose the appropriate thing that you want. But like I said, for the filaments, any filament, new filament you come across that you buy, you're going to want to definitely do a temp tower on each one. And then I also have a filament matrix spreadsheet that you can download from the website, and then you can list all your filaments there. It'll have the brand, color, temperature, retraction settings, speed that you print with, all that stuff, so you have an easy, rememberable chart that you can look at when you go to swap a filament, and you can be like, oh yeah, I already had this one, it's this, and then you can get right, put your settings right where they need to be, and go. So extensions and auto towers. So they even have bed level patterns. I do have one I created myself. It's 230 by 230 millimeter that has squares on the corners, and then one in the middle, and just so you can check your first layer and look at it. But on the towers, you're going to want to do, so you see all these here, there are temperature towers for ABA, ABS, nylon, PC, PETG, PLA, PLA plus, and TPU. And so when you first start out and you're using PLA or PLA plus, you can use, they just have a slightly different variation of start and stops for the temperature. I've used just PLA for even my PLA plus 2. So you can just start with the PLA and use it for everything mostly. And then once you choose temp tower, it'll place it there. In the past, you used to have to actually manually add in the code to change the temperatures, or I'd even go find some online with was G code already done for somebody who did something with the same printer that I had, and then I just download that G-code, because a lot of times I was trying to put it all together manually yourself, and then you end up going and it looks like the whole tower was done the same temperature, and there are some filaments that look similar through that whole temperature range. And then there's other times where it's like you don't know if it actually changed the temperature while it was doing it. So this feature now is awesome for Cura and makes it so much easier because you can just print it. And I've even actually watched it and the temperature changes as it goes. So these actually work. I've messed with them and they're awesome. So you can just put one in, slice it up, and then when you slice it, you can actually check and preview, and it'll show you the layers. And then you can take the dial on the right side and go down the layers, and you can see how it's going to print and what it's going to look like on the inside. All the surfaces. And then you can even go and you can hit the play down here, and it'll show you the layer that you're on, and it'll show you how it's going to print it. So it's just showing you how the G-code and what your printer is going to be reading and what it's going to tell your printer to do, and depend on the layer. And so you got those two, so you can preview it all, and preview is good for if you're going to look and see where your seams are at. So Z seam, you can check where that is, so you don't have to have it, and you can have it the exact spot you want it. But so yeah, those are all the basic functions. And then once if you use USB drive or an SD disk, then you can have it saved to that removable disk, or you can save it to your computer. So and then you can save that, and it'll have the G-code, and then you can put it on your SD card or USB flash drive, and then put in the printer and go. So that's what you do with that. So this is the Cura, and next episode I'm going to show the Prusa one. So this is the basics for Cura, and I'll show you the Prusa one in the next episode. But this is what you do for Cura to get yourself set up and ready to go. If you find these videos helpful, please like and subscribe to my YouTube, or go to printingfundamentals.com.